This is some fascinating things I'm going to talk to you about your brain and the way it responds in regards to diet culture and diet mentality, and also how we view our bodies and the beauty standards that are around us today. Hi, Carrie Nygaard here. I'm here to talk to you about brain science and how it relates to you finding freedom with your body and with food. So I had a client this week message me and said that she noticed that she saw someone who was very thin, and this person was talking about how they had difficult things going on in their lives and that they were actually even left at the altar. And she said in her head, she thought, how can someone that thin and beautiful have these problems? And I want you to notice is that because in our culture, there's this beauty standard. And this beauty standard is kind of a moving target. What's beautiful in this generation, it won't be what's beautiful in the next generation. It wasn't what was beautiful in past generations. It changes and evolves. And men, there's different beauty standards for men than there are for women. But they tend to be a little bit hyper, not even a little bit, they're a lot hyper focused and on for women. That women's value is heavily connected to how close to this standard of beauty they are. Now, combine that part of the standard of beauty is that our bodies should only have so much fat on them. Only an acceptable amount of fat to be able to be, right? Because thin is what's beautiful in the current standard, right? Or certain proportions is what is beautiful. Now, combine that with this idea that my client had of thin people don't have problems. And though she consciously didn't realize that this was playing out, subconsciously this belief that those who are thin don't have these problems plays out in how she relates to her body and how she relates to food. Because if she doesn't think that her body is thin, then she identifies herself with someone who has problems. And not only that, but she thinks that if she gets her body to release the weight, then her problems are solved. This is such a fascinating thing because our brain is hardwired to avoid pain. And anytime that there is anything painful in our lives, our brain flags it as a problem and as a possible threat to our survival. That's what it just automatically does. But once we get awareness that our brain, some of the basic things about its brain is this is one of them. It's going to strive to keep us alive, and that it's going to avoid pain in doing that. Combine this knowledge we have about our brains, it's been proven in brain science, lots of studies support this, with this idea that if I'm thin, then I don't have these problems. Your brain subconsciously is identifying thinness with increased probability of survival. Isn't that fascinating? So this becomes not only a matter of I just want to feel a little bit better, I just want to release some weight off my body. It then becomes in our minds this survival response. And then combine that with diet mentality that says we should restrict calories, we should restrict food groups. And then you know what we have? Then our brain really flips its survival switch, because now food, which is basic, right? Energy, food is a basic need for our survival. So if we're limiting food, and if we think that if we can get our body to be a certain thinness, now we won't have problems in our life, then it's going to cause our brain to hyper focus in on achieving this result on the outside before it gets to feel validated, before it gets to feel acceptable. This is all made up. This is all made up brain stories. Your brain's put all these different thoughts together that it's collected, you know, as even as a child, as you were growing up, before you had the ability to distinguish between what someone says is truth or error. Your brain was bringing in knowledge as if it were true, and a lot of those things were false because your brain wasn't developed yet. It didn't have the ability to distinguish between if it's right or wrong. And so as adults, different thoughts will reveal themselves as we are willing to do the work, as we do our thought work and our emotion work. As we do this, we realize that there's different thoughts that our brain has that have grown roots, that have become a belief, that aren't even true. And this particular client's was that thin people don't have problems. we consciously can look at it and know that it's not true, but somewhere along the way that belief got seated in there. So as we go through this process of becoming in deep partnership with our bodies and in having a healthy relationship with food, along the way these different limiting beliefs are going to come up that have just gotten programmed in there along the way. But if she can release through thought work, if she can release this idea that somehow thin people don't have problems, and realize that being human and humanity means that there are all spectrums of experiences all within one single person's lives. That at any one moment, one person is experiencing pleasure and pain, even at the very same time, whether it's internally or externally. Now apply that to this idea that we just want to release weight for the last time, finding freedom with food and freedom with our body. It has to be based upon this idea that our body is our most important relationship in this life, aside from our Creator. Because without our body, we would not be living. We would not be here among this earth, journeying throughout this realm of time. It wouldn't be happening. And instead be all in on that I want to release weight. Yeah, for sure I want to release fat off my body. But we're going to let go of the heaviness of it, that it's going to mean that somehow we're released from our problems, that somehow it's an exit from the human experience, because it's not. We're going to release it being such heavy meanings attached to it. And when you can give up these heavy meanings that we tend to attach to what releasing fat off our bodies means, then it gets a lot easier to do so. Then it becomes a lot easier to create a relationship with food that serves us, because it's not so heavy laden with all of this meaning that makes it take on ideas that it just doesn't mean. For the example, like what I shared, was that someone who's thin really doesn't have problems. I had a personal experience with this when I had finally gone all in on my body, and instead got curious around what really serves my body, what really fuels my body to live life. And once I was committed to that, and I also wanted to release fat, but I was committed to not doing that from a standpoint of belittling my body, of coming at it from restriction, but instead from love and acceptance. When I did that and let go of this idea that I had to lose fat in order to be worthwhile, that's when it got a lot easier. So I want you to analyze your own thoughts. What kind of silly thoughts that are limiting thoughts have taken root in your brain that seem to maybe be sabotaging you or keeping you from going where you want to go, that once you can identify them, you can just let them go and release the heavy meanings that's been attached to this idea of releasing fat off your body, because fat is just adipose tissue. That's all it is. It's stored energy on your body. And for sure, it doesn't mean that if you have less of it, you have less problems, okay? But there's other meanings that it could take on. Especially another example where this could pop up is that someone who's chronically dieted a lot over time can begin to identify themselves so much with someone who's striving to lose weight that they don't know or can conceive of who they are without that continual goal and striving for something. I experienced that. My brain was like, well, what will we do if we're not trying to lose weight? What will we try to accomplish then? And I was like, oh, we got lots to accomplish. But it wasn't until I could identify that thought error that my body and my brain then like released this psychological hold that sometimes can happen with fat. So begin to get curious from just this neutral place of what thoughts do I have that are keeping me from going where I want to go?